Why aren't factories built like Bournville anymore? Once, Britain's factories were more than just machines and steel. They were humming, living places where human creativity and mechanical precision worked together in perfect harmony. Bands like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and David Bowie session players grew up using instruments and tools born in these factories where craftsmanship was treated as an art form. Now the sites are empty lots, supermarket car parks, or repurposed warehouses stripped of their original meaning. The sounds, smells, and human rhythms of those workshops have vanished completely, erased from the landscape as if they never mattered, not through one catastrophe but through a long retreat, slow degradation, and quiet erosion that nobody seemed to notice until it was too late. This is the story of George Cadbury, the man behind Bournville, a visionary who believed factories could be more than profit machines, and the slow tragedy of how that vision was lost forever. George Cadbury's story begins in a tiny shop in Birmingham where he had almost nothing except a spark of obsession that would eventually change everything. Money was scarce, connections even scarcer, and the young Quaker apprenticed in a small grocer's store, learning the weight of sugar, the bitterness of cocoa, and the precision needed to mix a perfect paste. His hands, often sticky with chocolate residue, felt the possibilities in every block he molded, understanding instinctively that something special was waiting to be discovered. By night, he experimented in the back room of his home, and the aroma of cocoa powder, sweet and earthy, filled the cramped space where he worked tirelessly. The first batches were uneven and burnt at the edges, yet each mistake brought a lesson that moved him closer to perfection, and not through one catastrophe but through a long convergence of trial and error. George learned what would one day make his products famous throughout the world. Even in those tiny rooms lit by candlelight, a vision formed in his mind of a factory that treated workers like people, not machines. A place where chocolate could be crafted with care and where human dignity mattered as much as profit margins. In the first real workshop that George could call his own, he faced his first major challenge when space was limited and machinery was basic and unreliable, yet innovation thrived despite the obstacles. His head chocolatier, a slightly hard-of-hearing man named John, had a curious method of tasting cocoa that involved tapping the chocolate carefully and listening to it snap, adjusting the mix by pure instinct developed through decades of experience. They experimented constantly with sugar, cocoa butter, and milk in different proportions, trying to find the exact balance that would create something memorable, and every day the workshop smelled of caramelizing sugar and roasting cocoa. The warmth from the machines and the work itself made the small space feel alive in a way that larger, colder factories could never achieve, and workers felt connected to the product they were creating. It was here that the signature Bournville dark chocolate was born, deep, smooth, and slightly bitter, the kind of taste that stayed in your mouth long after it melted away. Necessity bred creativity in ways that money and modern equipment never could, and limited ingredients and noisy old boilers pushed them to discover methods that no bigger factory could claim or replicate. By the mid-1800s, Cadbury's tiny shop could barely keep up with overwhelming orders, and young apprentices, often no older than 12, scurried across the factory floor. The scent of chocolate mixed constantly with the sharp tang of metal from early machinery, and steam hissed from boilers in ways that seemed almost musical to those who worked there. Cocoa dust floated like mist in sunbeams through narrow windows, creating an atmosphere that felt almost magical to anyone entering. Word spread organically through communities about the quality of the chocolate and the care with which it was made, not through aggressive advertising but through genuine word of mouth. Families bought chocolate for holidays, and soon Cadbury won endorsements from local societies and fairs that recognized the exceptional quality. Each new success was celebrated quietly, and George himself would walk the factory floor regularly, taste-testing batches personally, nodding approval to workers who had done good work. The chocolate wasn't just food, it became a symbol of quality, care, and a new kind of industrial ambition that suggested factories could be places of dignity and craftsmanship. Not through one catastrophe but through a long, steady ascent built on careful attention to detail, the Cadbury name began to resonate far beyond Birmingham, becoming synonymous with excellence and integrity. By the early 1900s, Cadbury chocolate had become part of everyday life in Britain, woven into the fabric of British culture and identity in ways that few manufactured products ever achieve. Children carried small bars to school, soldiers requested it at the front during wartime, and George's commitment to worker welfare, which included light-filled housing, gardens where workers could grow vegetables, and recreation facilities, was so radical that other factory owners dismissed it as foolish sentimentality. Rock star-like moments occurred quietly as musicians and visiting dignitaries sampled the chocolate and marveled at its quality and distinctive taste. Apprentices became artisans through years of careful training, and the factory buzzed constantly with conversation and laughter and the sounds of people who took pride in their work. The sweet smell of caramelized sugar became a comforting constant, a smell that spoke of care and attention and human effort going into every product. Bournville wasn't just a factory, it was culture incarnate, a physical manifestation of certain values about how things should be done and how people should be treated. People began to associate the brand with reliability, warmth, and joy, with the feeling that using Cadbury products meant supporting something good and honest. Not through one catastrophe but through a slow, deliberate weaving of quality, care, and community. Bournville had arrived at the very heart of Britain's cultural consciousness. By 1913, Bournville had its purpose-built factory with brick buildings featuring tall chimneys, wide windows that let light flood the workspaces, and quiet courtyards where workers could rest during breaks. The workforce had grown to thousands, all working in coordinated production, and vertical integration meant cocoa beans came in from abroad while chocolate went out to the world, with everything in between handled on site with complete control over quality. Awards followed in abundance, including the Queen's recognition, and international export contracts showed the world recognized what Bournville represented. George's sons walked proudly among young chocolatiers, learning the business and understanding their responsibility to maintain standards. Factory tours became common, with thousands of people visiting annually, and families would bring their children who peered wide-eyed into the rooms where cocoa dust danced in sunlight like tiny particles of magic. The smell was intoxicating, a blend of warm chocolate, polished wood, and waxed floors that told you something special was happening in this place. Even visiting musicians commented that the aroma felt like music in its own right, a sensory experience that touched something deep about craft and care. Not through one catastrophe but through slow, meticulous layering of care and attention, the factory reached its absolute summit. Inside the factory at its peak, everything was alive with purposeful activity and human connection to the work being done every single day. Wooden crates of cocoa beans were stacked high, the hiss of steam filled the air constantly, and the rhythmic pounding of mixers created percussion that ran all day. Young apprentices tested bars by breaking them carefully, listening to the snap with trained ears, and adjusting ingredients by instinct developed through months of training. Workers moved with genuine pride, understanding that their work mattered and brought joy to countless people around the world. The process was almost ceremonial in its careful attention to detail and quality control at every step, something that modern factories have largely abandoned for pure speed. Tempering tables glinted in morning light, packaging machines whirred in perfect rhythm, and every corner smelled of chocolate, sugar, and possibility in ways that made workers feel part of something larger than themselves. It was more than production, it was a symphony of craft where every person understood their role and contributed skill and care to the final product. Not through one catastrophe but through countless hands working together, steady minds focused on excellence, and loving attention to detail, the factory became a sanctuary of excellence. But cracks were forming underneath the surface, subtle at first and barely noticeable to anyone not paying close attention. Corporate mergers pulled attention away from craft toward profits and shareholder returns, and new owners invested in machines but invested far less in people and their development. Expansion demanded compromise at every turn, and recipes shifted slightly in ways that longtime customers noticed and lamented, while outsourcing of ingredients began and accelerated. The factory floor remained bustling, but the careful hum of human oversight was noticeably less present, and conversations became more terse and businesslike. Warnings from experienced workers went unheeded by management focused on quarterly numbers rather than long-term quality. Not through one catastrophe but through a slow diversion of attention and priorities away from what had made the company great, the first cracks began to appear in the foundation. Post-war Britain brought fierce competition from abroad, and chocolate production became increasingly industrialized, cheaper, and faster elsewhere in ways that undercut traditional methods and values. Some recipes were simplified to cut costs, handcrafted bars became machine-only products with no human touch, and young apprentices were fewer as management sought cheaper foreign labor. The old workshop magic faded gradually into memory as machines replaced skilled hands and experience counted for less than efficiency metrics. Cultural shifts mattered tremendously as candy lost its ceremonial place in British homes, while Japanese imports and global brands took over retail shelves. Slowly, relentlessly, the factory's heartbeat weakened as it became just another production facility rather than a center of craft and care. Not through one catastrophe but through long retreat and gradual degradation of standards, the golden era came to an end. Receivership loomed on the horizon like a storm no one could stop, and distributors faltered under pressure from cheaper competitors. The council sought new uses for the site, and decisions were made quietly by people who had never worked on the factory floor. Machines were sold off, floors emptied, and longtime workers, once proud of their craft, were given redundancy notices that offered little comfort. The chocolate-making rooms grew silent, a silence that seemed deafening to those who remembered the sounds of purposeful work. Cocoa dust settled on bare floors that had once been the site of creative energy, marking the end of an era that could never be recovered. Not through one catastrophe but through a slow, relentless series of blows, the factory faced its final chapter. The factory buildings were demolished completely, erased from the landscape, and concrete and steel replaced brick and timber in a transformation that symbolized the loss of human values in manufacturing. Supermarkets and petrol stations rose where workshops once stood, places dedicated to consumption rather than creation, erasing physical memories of what had been. Machinery rusted in corners, forgotten by everyone except those who remembered what it created, and tools lay abandoned to decay. No plaque commemorated the lives that shaped a national legacy, and only memories remained, whispered by old employees who carried the stories like precious cargo. Not through one catastrophe but through quiet erasure of time, history became invisible, and people forgot what had been sacrificed in pursuit of profit. Today, the Cadbury name lives on in mass-produced chocolate made far from Britain, but the soul is completely absent from the product. The packaging is bright and familiar, but the warmth and care that once defined it are gone, replaced by marketing slogans and corporate logos. Recipes have been altered to reduce costs, heritage has been diluted through numerous ownership changes, and what remains is a hollow echo of greatness. The magic, the smell, the craft, the human connection, those belong only to history now, existing in the memories of people who lived through that era. Not through one catastrophe but through slow degradation of standards and values, a once living factory became a memory, a ghost of industry. Yet something survives quietly in kitchens and homes and in the careful breaking of a chocolate bar by someone who notices the quality of the snap and depth of flavor. The snap of the cocoa, the depth of the taste, the lingering warmth, they are whispers of a time when factories were human, alive, and caring, when people understood that their work mattered beyond just creating profit. George Cadbury's stubbornness about quality and insistence that workers deserve dignity created something more enduring than buildings or profit statements. Not through one catastrophe but through craft, care, and commitment to excellence, the sound, sweet, bitter, real, and honest, remains in memory and in the lessons those who care still try to apply. Factories may no longer be built like Bournville, but the echo of what they created continues quietly in every taste, and every memory, and in enduring respect for British manufacturing at its human best.